Welcome to Stories from the Shadows. I'm Modell, and here is part 2, lot number 249, by Arthur Conan Doyle. In this strange way began the acquaintance between Edward Bellingham and Abercrombie Smith, an acquaintance which the latter, at least, had no desire to push further. Bellingham, however, appeared to have taken a fancy to his rough-spoken neighbor, and made his advances in such a way that he could hardly be repulsed without absolute brutality. Twice he called to thank Smith for his assistance, and many times afterwards he looked in with books, papers, and such other civilities as two bachelor neighbors can offer to each other. He was, as Smith soon found, a man of wide reading, with catholic tastes, and an extraordinary memory. His manner, too, was so pleasing and suave that one came after a time to overlook his repellent appearance. For a jaded and wearied man he was no unpleasant companion, and Smith found himself, after a time, looking forward to his visits and even returning them. Clever as he undoubtedly was, however, the medical student seemed to detect a dash of insanity in the man. He broke out at times into such a high, inflated style of talk, which was in contrast with the simplicity of his life. "It is a wonderful thing," he cried, "to feel that one can command powers of good and of evil, a ministering angel, or a demon of vengeance." And again of Monkhouse Lee he said, "Lee is a good fellow, an honest fellow, but he is without strength or ambition. He would not make a fit partner for a man with a great enterprise. He would not make a fit partner for me." At such hints and innuendos, stolid Smith, puffing solemnly at his pipe, would simply raise his eyebrows and shake his head, with little interjections of medical wisdom as to earlier hours and fresher air. One habit Bellingham had developed of late, which Smith knew to be a frequent herald of a weakening mind. He appeared to be forever talking to himself. At late hours of the night, when there could be no visitor with him, Smith could still hear his voice beneath him, in a low, muffled monologue, sunk almost to a whisper, and yet very audible in the silence. This solitary babbling annoyed and distracted the student, so that he spoke more than once to his neighbor about it. Bellingham, however, flushed up at the charge and denied curtly that he had uttered a sound. Indeed, he showed more annoyance over the matter than the occasion seemed to demand. Had Abercrombie Smith had any doubt as to his own ears, he had not to go far to find corroboration. Tom Styles, the little wrinkled manservant who had attended to the wants of the lodgers in the turret for a longer time than any man's memory could carry him, was sorely put to it over the same matter. "If you please, sir," said he as he tidied down the top chamber one morning, "do you think Mr. Bellingham's is all right, sir?" "All right, Styles?" "Yes, sir, right in his head, sir." "Why should he not be, then?" "Well, I don't know, sir. His habits has changed of late. He's not the same man he used to be, though I make free to say that he was never quite one of my gentlemen, like Mr. Hasty or yourself, sir. He's took to talking to himself, something awful. I wonder it don't disturb you." "I don't know what to make of him, sir." "I don't know what business it is of yours, Styles." "Well, I takes an interest, Mr. Smith. It may be forward of me, but I can't help it. I feel sometimes as if I was mother and father to my young gentleman. It all falls on me when things go wrong and the relations come. But, Mr. Bellingham, sir, I want to know what it is that walks about in his room sometimes when he's out, and when the door's locked on the outside." "Eh? You're talking nonsense, Styles." "Well, maybe so, sir, but I heard it more'n once with my own ears." "Rubbish, Styles." "Very good, sir. You'll ring the bell if you want me." Abercrombie Smith gave little heed to the gossip of the old manservant, but a small incident occurred a few days later, which left an unpleasant effect upon his mind, and brought the words of Styles forcibly to his memory. Bellingham had come up to see him late one night, and was entertaining him with an interesting account of the rock tombs of Beni Hassan in Upper Egypt, when Smith, whose hearing was remarkably acute, distinctly heard the sound of a door opening on the landing below. "There's some fellow gone in or out of your room," he remarked. Bellingham sprang up and stood helpless for a moment, with the expression of a man who is half incredulous and half afraid. "I surely locked it. I am almost positive that I locked it," he stammered. "No one could have opened it." "Why, I hear someone coming up the steps now," said Smith. Bellingham rushed out through the door, slammed it loudly behind him, and hurried down the stairs. About halfway down, Smith heard him stop, and thought he caught the sound of whispering. A moment later, the door beneath him shut. A key creaked in a lock, and Bellingham, with beads of moisture upon his pale face, ascended the stairs once more and re-entered the room. "It's all right," he said, throwing himself down in a chair. "I was that fool of a dog. He had pushed the door open. I don't know how I came to forget to lock it." "I didn't know you kept a dog," said Smith, looking very thoughtfully at the disturbed face of his companion. "Yes, I haven't had him long. I must get rid of him. He's a great nuisance." "He must be, if you find it so hard to shut him up. I should have thought that shutting the door would have been enough without locking it." "I want to prevent old Styles from letting him out. He's of some value, you know. It would be awkward to lose him." "I am a bit of a dog fancier myself," said Smith, still gazing hard at his companion from the corner of his eye. "Perhaps you'll let me have a look at it." "Certainly, but I'm afraid it cannot be tonight. I have an appointment. Is that clock right? Then I am a quarter of an hour late already. You'll excuse me, I'm sure." He picked up his cap and hurried from the room. In spite of his appointment, Smith heard him re-enter his own chamber and lock his door from the inside. This interview left a disagreeable impression upon the medical student's mind. Bellingham had lied to him, and lied so clumsily that it looked as if he had desperate reasons for concealing the truth. Smith knew his neighbor had no dog. He knew also that the step which he had heard upon the stairs was not the step of an animal. But if it were not, then what could it be? There was old Styles' statement about the something which used to pace the room at times when the owner was absent. Could it be a woman? Smith rather inclined to the view. If so, it would mean disgrace and expulsion to Bellingham if it were discovered by the authorities, so that his anxiety and falsehoods might be accounted for. And yet, it was inconceivable that an undergraduate could keep a woman in his rooms without being instantly detected. Be the explanation what it might, there was something ugly about it, and Smith determined, as he turned to his books, to discourage all further attempts at intimacy on the part of his soft-spoken and ill-favored neighbor. But his work was destined to interruption that night. He had hardly caught the tip of the broken threads when a firm, heavy footfall came 3 steps at a time from below, and Hasty, in blazer and flannels, burst into the room. "Still at it?" said he, plumping down into his wonted armchair. "What a chap you are to stew! I believe an earthquake might come and knock Oxford into a cocked hat, and you would sit perfectly placid with your books among the reins. However, I won't bore you long. 3 whiffs of baccy, and I'm off." "What's the news, then?" asked Smith, cramming a plug of bird's eye into his briar with his forefinger. "Nothing very much. Wilson made 70 for the freshman against the 11. They say that they will play him instead of Buddicombe, for Buddicombe is clean off color. He used to be able to bowl a little, but it's nothing but half volleys and long hops now." "Medium right," suggested Smith with the intense gravity which comes upon a varsity man when he speaks of athletics. "Inclining to fast with a work from leg. Comes with an arm about 3 inches or so. He used to be nasty on a wet wicket. Oh, by the way, have you heard about Long Norton?" "What's that?" He's been attacked. Attacked? Yes, just as he was turning out of the high street and within 100 yards of the gate of Olds. But who? Ah, that's the rub. If you said what, you would be more grammatical. Norton swears that it was not human, and indeed, from the scratches on his throat, I should be inclined to agree with him. What then? Have we come down to spooks? Abercrombie Smith puffed his scientific contempt. Well, no, I don't think that is quite the idea either. I'm inclined to think that if any showman has lost a great ape lately, and the brute is in these parts, a jury would find a true bill against it. Norton passes that way every night, you know, about the same hour. There's a tree that hangs low over the path, the big elm from Rainey's garden. Norton thinks the thing dropped on him out of the tree. Anyhow, he was nearly strangled by two arms which he says were as strong and as thin as steel bands. He saw nothing, only those beastly arms that tightened and tightened on him. He yelled his head nearly off, and a couple of chaps came running, and the thing went over the wall like a cat. He never got a fair sight of it the whole time. It gave Norton a shake-up, I can tell you. I tell him it has been as good as a change at the seaside for him. A garroter, most likely, said Smith. Very possibly. Norton says not, but we don't mind what he says. The garroter had long nails and was pretty smart at swinging himself over walls. By the way, your beautiful neighbor would be pleased if he heard about it. He had a grudge against Norton, and he's not a man, from what I know of him, to forget his little debts. But hello, old chap, what have you got in your noddle? Nothing, Smith answered curtly. He had started in his chair, and the look had flashed over his face, which comes upon a man who is struck suddenly by some unpleasant idea. You looked as if something I had said had taken you on the raw. By the way, you have made the acquaintance of Master B since I looked in last, have you not? Young Monkhouse Lee told me something to that effect. Yes, I know him slightly. He has been up here once or twice. Well, you're big enough and ugly enough to take care of yourself. He's not exactly what I should call exactly a healthy sort of Johnny, though. No doubt he's very clever and all that, but you'll soon find out for yourself. Lee's all right. He's a very decent little fellow. Well, so long, old chap. I row Mullins for the Vice-Chancellor's pot on Wednesday week, so mind you come down in case I don't see you before. Bovine Smith laid down his pipe and turned stolidly to his books once more. But with all the will in the world, he found it very hard to keep his mind upon his work. It would slip away to brood upon the man beneath him and upon the little mystery which hung round his chambers. Then his thoughts turned to the singular attack of which Hasty had spoken, and to the grudge which Bellingham was said to owe to the object of it. The two ideas would persist in rising together in his mind, as though there were some close and intimate connection between them. And yet the suspicion was so dim and vague that it could not be put down in words. Confound the chap, cried Smith as he shied his book on pathology across the room. He has spoiled my night's reading, and that's reason enough, if there were no other, why I should steer clear of him in the future. For 10 days, the medical student confined himself so closely to his studies that he neither saw nor heard anything of either of the men beneath him at the hours when Bellingham had been accustomed to visit him. He took care to sport his oath, and though he more than once heard a knocking at his outer door, he resolutely refused to answer it. One afternoon, however, he was descending the stairs when, just as he was passing it, Bellingham's door flew open, and young Monkhouse Lee came out with his eyes sparkling and a dark flush of anger upon his olive cheeks. Close at his heels followed Bellingham, his fat, unhealthy face all quivering with malignant passion. You fool, he hissed. You'll be sorry. Very likely, cried the other. Mind what I say. It's off. I won't hear of it. You've promised anyhow. Oh, I'll keep that. I won't speak, but I'd rather little Eva was in her grave. Once for all, it's off. She'll do what I say. We don't want to see you again. So much Smith could not avoid hearing, but he hurried on, for he had no wish to be involved in their dispute. There'd been a serious breach between them, that was clear enough, and Lee was going to cause the engagement with his sister to be broken off. Smith thought of Hasty's comparison of the toad and the dove, and was glad to think that the matter was at an end. Bellingham's face when he was in a passion was not pleasant to look upon. He was not a man to whom an innocent girl could be trusted for life. As he walked, Smith wondered languidly what could have caused the quarrel, and what the promise might be which Bellingham had been so anxious that Monkhouse Lee should keep. It was the day of the sculling match between Hasty and Mullins, and a stream of men were making their way down to the banks of the Isis. A May sun was shining brightly, and the yellow path was barred with the black shadows of the tall elm trees. On either side the grey colleges lay back from the road, the hoary old mothers of mines looking out from their high mullioned windows at the tide of young life which swept so merrily past them. Black-clad tutors, prim officials, pale reading men, brown-faced, straw-hatted young athletes in white sweaters or many-colored blazers, all were hurrying towards the blue winding river which curves through the Oxford meadows. Abercrombie Smith, with the intuition of an old oarsman, chose his position at the point where he knew that the struggle, if there were to be a struggle, would come. Far off he heard the hum which announced the start, the gathering roar of the approach, the thunder of running feet and the shouts of the men in the boats beneath him. A spray of half-clad, deep-breathing runners shot past him, and craning over their shoulders he saw Hasty pulling a steady 36, while his opponent with a jerky 40 was a good boat's length behind him. Smith gave a cheer for his friend, and pulling out his watch was starting off again for his chambers, when he felt a touch upon his shoulder, and found that young Monkhouse Lee was beside him. "I saw you there," he said in a timid, deprecating way. "I wanted to speak to you. If you could spare me a half-hour, this cottage is mine. I share it with Harrington of King's. Come in and have a cup of tea." "I must be back presently," said Smith. "I am hard on the grind at present, but I'll come in for a few minutes with pleasure. I wouldn't have come out only Hasty is a friend of mine." "So he is of mine. Hasn't he a beautiful style? Mullins wasn't in it. But come into the cottage. It's a little den of a place, but it is pleasant to work in during the summer months." It was a small, square, white building, with green doors and shutters, with rustic trellis-work porch, standing back some 50 yards from the river's bank. Inside, the main room was roughly fitted up as a study, deal table, unpainted shelves with books, and a few cheap oleographs upon the wall. A kettle sang upon a spirit stove, and there were tea things upon a tray on the table. "Take that chair. Have a cigarette," said Lee. "Let me pour you out a cup of tea. It's so good of you to come in, for I know that your time is a good deal taken up. I wanted to say to you that if I were you, I should change my rooms at once." "Eh?" Smith sat staring with a lighted match in one hand and his unlit cigarette in the other. "Yes, it must seem very extraordinary, and the worst of it is that I cannot give my reasons, for I am under a solemn promise, a very solemn promise, but I may go so far as to say that I don't think Bellingham is a very safe man to live near, and I intend to camp out here as much as I can for a time." "Not safe? What do you mean?" "No, that's just what I mustn't say. But do take my advice and move your rooms. We had a grand row today. You must have heard us, for you came down the stairs." "I saw that you had fallen out." "He's a horrible chap, Smith. That is the only word for him. I have had doubts about him ever since that night when he fainted. You remember when you came down. I taxed him today, and he told me things that made my hair rise, and wanted me to stand in with him. I'm not straight-laced, but I am a clergyman's son, you know, and I think there are some things which are quite beyond the pale. I only thank God I found him out before it was too late, for he was to have married into my family." "This is all very fine, Lee," said Abercrombie Smith curtly, "but either you are saying a great deal too much or a great deal too little. I give you warning. If there is real reason for warning, no promise can bind you. If I see a rascal about to blow up a place with dynamite, no pledge will stand in my way of preventing him. But I cannot prevent him, and I can do nothing but warn you, without saying what you warn me against. Against Bellingham. But that is childish. Why should I fear him or any man? I can't tell you. I can only entreat you to change your rooms. You are in danger where you are. I don't even say that Bellingham would wish to injure you, but it might happen, for he is a dangerous neighbor just now." "Perhaps I know more than you think," said Smith, looking keenly at the young man's boyish, earnest face. "Suppose I tell you that someone else shares Bellingham's rooms?" Monkhouse Lee sprang from his chair in uncontrollable excitement. "You know, then?" he gasped. "A woman." Lee dropped back again with a groan. "My lips are sealed," he said. "I must not speak." "Well, anyhow," said Smith, rising, "it is not likely that I should allow myself to be frightened out of rooms which suit me very nicely. It would be a little too feeble for me to move out all my goods and chattels because you say that Bellingham might, in some unexplained way, do me an injury. I think I'll just take my chance and stay where I am, and as I see that it's nearly 5 o'clock, I must ask you to excuse me." He bade the young student adieu in a few curt words, and made his way homeward through the sweet spring evening, feeling half ruffled, half amused, as any other strong, unimaginative man might, who has been menaced by a vague and shadowy danger. There was one little indulgence which Abercrombie Smith always allowed himself, however closely his work might press upon him. Twice a week, on the Tuesday and the Friday, it was his invariable custom to walk over to Farlingford, the residence of Dr. Plumptree Peterson, situated about a mile and a half out of Oxford. Peterson had been a close friend of Smith's elder brother Francis, and as he was a bachelor, fairly well-to-do, with a good cellar and a better library, his house was a pleasant goal for a man who was in need of a brisk walk. Twice a week, then, the medical student would swing out there along the dark country roads and spend a pleasant hour in Peterson's comfortable study, discussing, over a glass of old port, the gossip of the varsity or the latest developments of medicine or of surgery. On the day which followed his interview with Monkhouse Lee, Smith shut up his books at 8:15, the hour when he usually started for his friend's house. As he was leaving his room, however, his eyes chanced to fall upon one of the books which Bellingham had lent him, and his conscience pricked him for not having returned it. However repellent the man might be, he should not be treated with discourtesy. Taking the book, he walked downstairs and knocked at his neighbor's door. There was no answer, but on turning the handle he found that it was unlocked. Pleased at the thought of avoiding an interview, he stepped inside and placed the book with his card upon the table. The lamp was turned half down, but Smith could see the details of the room plainly enough. It was all much as he had seen it before: the frieze, the animal-headed gods, the banging crocodile, and the table littered over with papers and dried leaves. The mummy case stood upright against the wall, but the mummy itself was missing. There was no sign of any second occupant of the room, and he felt as he withdrew that he had probably done Bellingham an injustice. Had he a guilty secret to preserve, he would hardly leave his door open so that all the world might enter. The spiral stair was as black as pitch, and Smith was slowly making his way down its irregular steps, when he was suddenly conscious that something had passed him in the darkness. There was a faint sound, a whiff of air, a light brushing past his elbow. but so slight that he could scarcely be certain of it. He stopped and listened, but the wind outside was rustling among the ivy, and he could hear nothing else. "Is that you, Styles?" he shouted. There was no answer, and all was still behind him. It must have been a sudden gust of air, for there were crannies and cracks in the old turret, and yet he could almost have sworn that he heard a footfall by his very side. He had emerged into the quadrangle, still turning the matter over in his head, when a man came running swiftly across the smooth-cropped lawn. "Is that you, Smith? Hello, Hasty. For God's sake, come at once. Young Lee is drowned. Here's Harrington of King's with the news. The doctor's out. You'll do, but come along at once. There may be life in him. Have you brandy?" "No." "I'll bring some. There's a flask on my table." Smith bounded up the stairs, taking 3 at a time, seized the flask, and was rushing down with it, when, as he passed Bellingham's room, his eyes fell upon something which left him gasping and staring upon the landing. The door, which he had closed behind him, was now open, and right in front of him, with the lamplight shining upon it, was the mummy case. 3 minutes ago it had been empty, he could swear to that. Now it framed the lank body of its horrible occupant, who stood grim and stark, with his black, shriveled face towards the door. The form was lifeless and inert, but it seemed to Smith, as he gazed, that there still lingered a lurid spark of vitality, some faint sign of consciousness in the little eyes which lurked in the depths of the hollow sockets. So astounded and shaken was he that he had forgotten his errand and was still staring at the lean, shrunken figure when the voice of his friend below recalled him to himself. "Come on, Smith," he shouted. "It's life and death, you know. Hurry up." "Now then," he added as the medical student reappeared, "let us do a sprint. It's well under a mile. We should do it in 5 minutes. A human life is better worth running for than a pot." Neck and neck they dashed through the darkness, and did not pull up until, panting and spent, they had reached the little cottage by the river. Young Lee, limp and dripping like a broken water plant, was stretched upon the sofa, the green scum of the river upon his black hair and a fringe of white foam upon his leaden-hued lips. Beside him knelt his fellow student, Harrington, endeavoring to chafe some warmth back into his rigid limbs. "I think there's life in him," said Smith, with his hand to the lad's side. "Put your watch-glass to his lips." "Yes, there's dimming on it. You take one arm, Hasty. Now work it as I do. We'll soon pull him round." For 10 minutes they worked in silence, inflating and depressing the chest of the unconscious man. At the end of that time, a shiver ran through his body. His lips trembled, and he opened his eyes. The 3 students burst out into an irrepressible cheer. "Wake up, old chap. You've frightened us quite enough. Have some brandy. Take a sip from the flask." "He's all right now," said his companion Harrington. "Heavens, what a fright I got. I was reading here, and he'd gone for a stroll as far as the river, when I heard a scream and a splash. Out I ran, and by the time that I could find him and fish him out, all life seemed to have gone. Then Simpson couldn't get a doctor, for he has a game leg, and I had to run. I don't know what I would have done without you fellows. That's right, old chap, sit up." Monkhouse Lee had raised himself on his hands and looked wildly about him. "What's up?" he asked. "I've been in the water." Yes, I remember." A look of fear came into his eyes, and he sank his face into his hands. "How did you fall in?" "I didn't fall in." "How then?" "I was thrown in. I was standing by the bank, and something from behind picked me up like a feather and hurled me in. I heard nothing. I saw nothing. But I know what it was for all that." "And so do I," whispered Smith. Lee looked up with a quick glance of surprise. "You've learned, then," he said. "You remember the advice I gave you." "Yes, and I begin to think that I shall take it." I don't know what the deuce you fellows are talking about, said Hasty, but I think if I were you, Harrington, I should get Lee to bed at once. It will be time enough to discuss the why and the wherefore when he's a little stronger. I think, Smith, you and I can leave him alone now. I'm walking back to the college. If you were coming in that direction, we can have a chat. But it was little chat that they had upon their homeward path. Smith's mind was too full of the incidents of the evening, the absence of the mummy from his neighbor's rooms, the step that passed him on the stair, the reappearance, the extraordinary, inexplicable reappearance of the grisly thing, and then this attack upon Lee, corresponding so closely to the previous outrage upon another man against whom Bellingham bore a grudge. All this settled in his thoughts, together with the many little incidents which had previously turned him against his neighbor, and the singular circumstances under which he was first called into him. What had been a dim suspicion, a vague, fantastic conjecture, had suddenly taken form and stood out in his mind as a grim fact, a thing not to be denied. And yet how monstrous it was, how unheard of, how entirely beyond all the bounds of human experience. An impartial judge, or even the friend who walked by his side, would simply tell him that his eyes had deceived him, that the mummy had been there all the time, that young Lee had tumbled into the river as any other man tumbles into a river, and that a blue pill was the best thing for a disordered liver. He felt that he would have said as much if the positions had been reversed, and yet he could swear that Bellingham was a murderer at heart, and that he wielded a weapon such as no man had ever used in all the grim history of crime. Join me next week on Stories from the Shadows for another spine-tingling tale of the unseen and the unknown.